Have you ever found that when you fall asleep, strange things show up in your dream space? Or perhaps you're afraid of going to sleep because there's something that makes you uneasy about it, even though you're not sure why? Or maybe you actually try to avoid going to sleep, even when you're really tired and you know you need to. Today we're discussing what things can come into your dream space, why they do, and how to hold your space so that you can wake up refreshed and clear. And after the discussion, we get to the most important part of this episode. The group frequency calibration at the end is where the frequency work happens and where change actually occurs. So be sure to listen to that. Without releasing distortion patterns targeted by the GFC, the change you want will be more difficult to attain because you haven't addressed the root of the issue. My name is Karen Cheong, and today in Mastering Your World Through Frequencies, we're discussing holding your space in your sleep.
So in the past, we've talked about holding space and the importance of that in your waking life. I'm curious because I've had a lot of experiences where evil entities or darkness tries to come into my dream state. I'm wondering, can you hold your space in your sleep?
Yeah, that's a really great question because a lot of people have that question because there are a number of people who are very active in their dreams, meaning that they can sense future things will be shown to them in their dreams, or they learn lessons in their dreams, or things come to them and share wisdom with them in their dreams. So the dream space is really important, and some people don't remember their dreams, but that doesn't mean things don't happen in it. So I think it's an important topic. Now, to answer your question, yes, you have to. At first, though, it's going to be harder, meaning when your frequency resonance is lower and you have a lot of distortion, it's harder to hold your space in your dream, okay? So just for you all to know. And some people are even afraid to go to sleep because when they go to sleep, things happen and they don't like it. So I
know a lot of people like that.
Yeah. So it's hard for them because what does that mean? It means that things that are darker come into that space, and because you're asleep, you don't know how to hold your space. And even if you're awake, you may not even know how to hold your space. Does that make sense? So it's worse in the dream space, right? So things are what that's mirroring is that you can't hold your space, generally speaking, okay? Whether you're awake or whether you're asleep, make sense? So it's hard for you to hold boundaries, generally speaking.
Right. And people can listen to that GFC if they want to know more about.
Yeah. So that particular episode, I think it was episode 120, Steady She Goes, Holding Your Space. Go ahead and watch that if you don't know what we're talking about. But that's, so just as a reference for people. Okay. So in this particular case, for your sleep state, so when you go to sleep, it happens more as you rise in frequency resonance. So why? Because you start to become more aware of yourself and your space. Does that make sense? Because for a lot of people who have trouble in their dream space, it's because they're generally, like I said, having trouble holding their space at all, even their wake life.
Yeah.
So as you start to clarify, release your distortions about feeling bad and feeling guilty and whatever, you start to become more and more in your own center, and you start to not like it when people come into your space because you understand the consequence of it. And as a result, your frequency resonance is higher. And when your frequency resonance gets higher, you have more authority, not only in your awake state, but in your sleeping state. So to hold your space in your sleep state requires that you're clearer in resonance. Okay. Secondly, what is important is that so what's helpful, I'll just give you a tool, okay? So for those of you who have trouble with this, what you can do is you can play a GFC before you go to sleep. Because if you do that, then it can start to hold you in the 0 point in your awake state and help you transition into your dream space. So you're more aware of your space, even if you don't consciously remember it, when you enter that realm. Okay, and so just for you to know, we're going to be giving either a GFC or a deep dive on being able to hold your space in your sleep for those of you who need it. So you can listen to that as you enter that dream world so that you can hold your space better. Okay, so that's a tool. If you don't have that, you can GPS before you go to sleep. So for those of you who don't know what GPSing is, that's to become aware of 3 inanimate objects in the space around you, be aware of the distance from each object to you, and feel that distance. Why? Because that puts you more in your 0 point as you're falling asleep, meaning you know where you are, you're anchoring yourself in this space-time reality, so that when you enter that dream realm, you're not scattered all over the place, you're centered. The better you are able to be in your center, in your 0, the better able you are to hold your space, okay? Whatever the moment.
That makes sense, because I know, just a little side note, with like lucid dreaming, you know, people who want to be aware of that they're dreaming and control their dreams, that's a whole other topic. But to do that, it actually starts in your waking life.
Yes.
So I know that like the waking actually really does impact the dream.
Absolutely.
So good. Working on those while you're awake helps with
you
the dreams.
Yeah. And also, like, what your frequency resonance is as you go to sleep matters. So, for example, if you're consuming a lot of social media or watching something that's like depressing or darker or whatever, violent or whatever those lower things are, or you're afraid, you know, because you're watching like a horror movie or something like this, right? You're already in a lower resonance before you enter that dream world. It's better for you to be in a higher resonance. If you know this is a challenge for you, to be in a higher resonance, so that when you go into that state, your resonance is higher. Because again, as always, the higher your frequency resonance, the more able you are to like have authority in that space that's you. Okay? So just mentioning that. So those things will set you up to have more success in that dream world. I'll also say that for some of you who are even like afraid of going to sleep, you know, because it scares you. You know, you're always procrastinating. You don't want to go to bed. There's like always a thing, and you know you're exhausted, but you're never going to sleep. Sometimes there are things that are in your physical space that need to be cleared, because they know that as you go into sleep, you shift. Obviously, you're going into a different state, and therefore your space becomes more open to them. Okay, so if you have that experience where you're like afraid and you feel uneasy going to sleep, then I would recommend something like the frequency saging, clearing your space, GFC that we have, to help you clear your space, so that when you go to sleep, that space is clear for you. That's that nice. Physical space, okay, so that you don't feel so scared when you go into your bed to sleep.
That's helpful. So you could do that one and this.
Yeah. So you could do a combination of things if that's helpful. So how do you hold your space when you're going to sleep? Okay, and what will happen a lot is, so I'm just going to preface this by saying I'm giving you tips and tools, and there are some of you in your dream space, you'll need to do something active, and you have a story about this, so we'll talk about that in a minute. But one of the things you can do is before you sleep is say to yourself, like you basically are programming yourself, okay, so I'm not doing this, you're doing this for yourself, to say something like, and you choose the wording that works for you, if anything that's not aligned with pure source comes into my space, into my dream space, I will wake up. So basically you're commanding yourself to wake up. So because, why? Because some of you are at the point where your frequency resonance is getting strong enough so that when you're in your awake state, you know how to hold your space. You're like, get out. And you have the authority to get things out of your space. But if you're asleep, you don't quite have that, right? So if you tell yourself that before you go to sleep, so if before something comes into you, you wake up, you then are like, okay, wait a minute, I know what's happening, and you can push them out. Make sense?
Yeah.
So that's another tip or something that you can do. Okay. So now, some of you will experience things in your dream space that are like teachings or like learnings to teach you how to hold your space in your dream space, because you need help with boundaries, actually. And I think you have something that's a story around this, a couple of them.
My lifelong lesson. Yeah, I know, like for me and a lot of people who have issues with this, it's because you feel bad and you like everything to be nice and you don't want to hurt someone's feelings. So I know a couple, maybe it was about a year ago now, time's flying, but in the past, I was working on holding my space with you in my waking life. We had IFCs and I was doing GFCs, and there was points where I would be like waiting in line and people would literally like walk in front of me. Like, it was crazy. They were just in my, So I was working heavily on that. And then I would have these dreams and I would have like themes. I remember I had one in particular, it came in a theme of 3. And it would be some like darker entity, not like possessed per se, but just like something evil, not dark, of not light. Trying to coerce me in my dream. And the lesson was I had to hold my space. One of the things, they were like trying to sell me something that I didn't want. And I knew I didn't want it. And they're like, but you want it. And I was like, well, I feel bad. I'm just going to go ahead and buy it. Like that whole thing. And then boom, something bad happened. Like as a result. And I didn't pass the test. I was like, darn it. So it took me 3 times, and they would show up in different versions. And the third one, I did it. I can't remember the details now, but I passed the test. I held my space. And I've never had that dream again.
Yeah.
Just super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So sometimes in your dream space, depending on what you're doing, so for you, because that was a big lesson for you, and because you were ascending so fast in terms of your resonance, the darkness can come into your dream space to test you. And really what they're doing, so let me just make this clear, okay? So the darkness is opportunistic, right? So if you are, they're going to push you. If you pass, like if you hold your space, great, they'll leave you alone. But if you don't, they're like, fair game. They're just gonna come further into your space, and it'll happen more. Like the dreams will get more intense, actually.
Yes.
Okay, until you're like finally like no. So it's in a way it's a teacher, because you're learning to do what it is that you need to do, which is to hold your space against whatever it is that's pushing into you, which you learned. And once that happens, they actually leave you alone. But if you don't, like I said, they come further and further and further in. So it's really important that it's more of I don't know if it's a test, but it's more like a lesson. It's like, how far are you gonna let me come in here until you say no? Okay. So you may have something like that happen. I know that has happened with me. Like I can't even remember exactly what the dream was like, but it was something similar.
Sure.
And I had to do something similar as well. And it's happened at different stages for me. So more at the beginning, for example, I remember one time. This thing came in, and it took the form of my father in my dream, who had just passed away maybe like a year ago or a year. So it was showing up as my father. And so, of course, I saw my dad, and I love my father, and I was very close to him. So my heart started to open because I saw my father in my dream space. And it did something funny where it was weird, either it's form change. I can't exactly remember the details, but because I told myself that thing, like I'm gonna wake myself up. Like if I anything that comes into my dream space is not pure source, I will wake up. I woke up. So as it was coming closer to me, I woke up, and in that moment, I knew, because in my awake state, I was strong enough, and I was like, and I was so furious because it tricked me. I was like, how dare you take the form of my father? How dare you? And I remember I went back into the dream. I went back in, and I this was not very neutral, I have to admit, but I flung it because I was pissed.
You're pissed, yeah.
I was like, that is just low.
Yeah.
Okay, and so sometimes for some of you, for your case, you had the dream 3 times before you were able to stop. If you wake up and you have the wherewithal, you're like,
you can go back in. Yeah.
So you go back in with that knowing, you're like, get out, and you go back into the dream. And then you do whatever you need to do. Now it's your dream space. You can do whatever you want. You can have thigh-high boots, you can have guns, you can throw things, you can do whatever you want. It's a dream. Right? You're lucid dreaming at this point. But for me, that was an important part of holding my space in my dream, to not be because there I was opening my heart space. Of course, I saw my dad, right? So there I was opening my heart space. And I didn't ask for, I just was doing, my heart was opening. So it was a good lesson for me. Just be hold your space first, ask, then open the heart space.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
That's good.
So it was really important.
Well, that's a hard one when it's your dad. Yeah, that's tricky.
Yeah, tricky.
There's little tricksters. They're tricksters.
They are.
Little trickster energy.
Yeah, exactly. And opportunistic, right?
Yes.
And so it's well, you got to do that. Well, then. And what I'll say is something we've said, you and I, before. We talked about it in maybe a different context. If they're trying to come into you, if they're trying to get closer to you, they are not of the light. Right. The light does not need to come into you. It doesn't. The darkness needs to come into you, in the sense of it needs to feed on something.
Oh, right.
Right? So if it's trying to come into you in your dream space, it's not good. You don't want it there.
Yep.
It doesn't matter what they look like. You really just don't want it. You know?
Yep. And speaking of that, I recently had someone very close to me pass, and I told you I had a dream. Really, it was right when they passed. I had found out later, the same timing. They're in a different time zone, but there was a evil entity, evil, possessed.
Yeah.
It was a face with the eyes, and they were trying to get into me. So very different than being in you.
Yeah.
Which you made clear, thank you. So it doesn't mean I was possessed by them.
No.
They were trying to.
Yeah.
And I was doing all my things that I do, and they just laughed at me.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't get rid of them. Now, again, thankfully they weren't in me, but they were around.
Yeah.
And I had a session with you, and we
cleared it.
Cleared that. But
yeah. And what it was doing was, it's interesting because in the dream that you told me about, was like they were laughing at you. Like they were taunting you, like you're not powerless, you can't make me go away.
Exactly.
Because they're trying to make you feel powerless so that they could try to come in. But what I would say is to your credit, you didn't. You're just like, I mean, you woke yourself up or you woke up or whatever happened, but you didn't let them come into you.
No.
Right? So that's my point, is like, even if you wake yourself up and they don't come in, you're winning. Even if it feels kind of crappy because they've been laughing at you and whatever.
Right, and taunting,
telling you
they're
whatever,
around.
and like, you can't do anything, you're powerless. It doesn't matter what they tell you. You hold, right? And then you wake, either you wake yourself up or the dream will change or whatever it is. So they'll do all kinds of things, right? To try and emotionally manipulate you in the dream space to make you feel less than, to try to come in your space or make you feel bad or guilty or whatever the hell, whatever they do, or afraid. They'll try to scare you. That's another thing they do. So whatever it is, you're just like, no, okay? You're not allowed, right? So even in that dream space, you're aware that you're like, I don't want it, you know? So even in the like feeling in that dream of like, no, I don't want it, it's enough. You're holding your space then.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
That could be very empowering.
Yeah.
So yeah, not to scare people. It's an empowering move, really.
Oh, totally.
To be able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I said, for some of you, you'll have this happen where they'll come in to test your mettle, to see how strong you are. And this is not for everyone. So before everyone freaks out, like, oh my God, Karen says the darkness is coming in my dreams. I did not say that, okay? It may happen for you. If it does, we give you a whole bunch of tools of what to do. And what's important is for you to not allow them into your space.
Yeah, that's the bottom line.
Yeah, it's the bottom line.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Karen.
You're most welcome. So if you would like to center yourself better, so that when you enter your dream space, you can hold your space better, I do recommend listening to the group frequency calibration that's associated with this episode. Now, for those of you who have more trouble with this, who know that this is a challenge for you, we are going to be giving a GFC or deep dive on holding your space in your sleep, which is for purchase on the website. So go check that out. And if you've liked this episode and found it helpful, please give us a thumbs up and like the video below and subscribe by hitting the red button below. We're about to start the group frequency calibration, or GFC, where we actually do the frequency work and where change is catalyzed. To get to the GFC, click on the square that'll appear to the right or the link in the description below. It's time to bring in a new experience, a new consciousness, and a new world. Let's rise together.